Hello everybody. Welcome to North Sydney Council's workshop for hot water systems for strata buildings. This workshop arose out of a need to get a better understanding about the high cost of running gas hot water systems and the best alternatives to them, as there are some excellent options out there today. But before we start, I just want to say on behalf of North Sydney Council, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting today from the lands of the Camaragal people. And I also acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the various lands that we are meeting on today, and pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging. So what we're learning now is that solar power is the cheapest source of electricity in history, as announced recently by the International Energy Agency just last year. So that relates to renewable electricity. So today we'll be talking about its sister source of energy, renewable heat energy, also from the sun, and the machines that harvest that energy from the air. It's also extremely cheap to harvest. Those miraculous machines are called heat pumps. There is a heat pump extracting heat from inside your freezer and your refrigerator right as we speak. And there is also a heat pump at the heart of all reverse cycle air conditioners. And now they're being found inside hot water systems. And I like to think about how good the deal is with heat pumps in the following way. If you gave me one orange and I gave you 4 oranges back, how would you feel about that? That's the kind of deal that heat pumps give you. So now I'll hand over to the experts in strata hot water, and indeed all things related to strata sustainability, Hvac, who are the current consultants for our Futureproofing Apartments program. So take it away, Brent Clark. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. And it's great to be here and see so many people joining us for heat pump hot water in strata apartment buildings. On the screen, you can see 21 Holbrook Avenue in Kirribilli. And this is just one of the sites in the North Sydney LGA, which has an electric heat pump installed for hot water. We've got a lot of content today. As Ian mentioned, it was originally designed for a 2-hour face-to-face workshop, which we've now moved online. We'll just jump into it. We'll be moving quickly through the content, and then after we've done the formal presentation, there'll be time for questions. So where do we start? Today, we'll have people attending this webinar who live in strata buildings with different hot water setups. Firstly, some residents will receive gas bills measured in megajoules, and some will receive hot water bills measured in litres. And keep in mind, your Sydney water bill is only for cold water, not for hot water. Some people attending this call will have a tempering valve for their apartment, which stops people inside the unit getting scalded, and some won't. Some people attending this call will have a hot water supply which passes through an ultraviolet filter to kill bacteria and viruses, and some won't. And some people on this webinar will get their hot water supply from their own private hot water tank, and some will get their hot water supply from a central hot water plant. 2 key metrics: a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment might consume 75 litres of hot water per day, and a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment might consume 90 litres of hot water per day. Now, there's just one point we want to make on this slide. The energy used to heat hot water can actually be higher than the next highest residential energy use, which is heating and cooling. And this is based on Ausgrid data, Ausgrid being the electricity grid under the North Sydney LGA and most of the Sydney, Greater Sydney area. Now, the engineering superpowers like Germany and Japan have been pushing heat pumps for decades. More recently, some people have heard that every Tesla electric vehicle now comes with a heat pump inside the car. Now, the UK has been a bit of a laggard on heat pumps compared to the rest of Europe, in particular Germany. Now, in July this year and August, there have been a couple of big announcements from the UK. So Boris Johnson's saying the UK may need a big bet on heat pumps. And in August, they announced grants of up to £7,000 to help households replace gas boilers. And they've even mentioned that in the UK, they may they may ban gas hot water boilers after 2035. Now, another city that has been a big laggard is actually New York. It's a terrible energy consuming city. And in July, they've also announced $4 million of grants towards community heat pump networks in New York State. So on this slide, we're looking at where heat pumps fit in the overall strata sustainability universe. And basically all 360,000 strata buildings in Australia should be aiming to move to what's depicted in this diagram over the next decade. Now, heat pumps appear at 3 different places in this diagram. As Ian mentioned earlier, all reverse cycle air conditioning units have heat pumps inside them. So if you've got a split air conditioning system for your apartment or your townhouse in a strata scheme, you've already got a heat pump there. Now, most of the focus of this webinar is on using a heat pump to heat the common hot water plant to deliver hot water to the kitchens and bathrooms. But heat pumps can also be used to heat pools in strata. And in fact, in Australia, we've really adopted heat pumps for pool heating for a couple of decades. So what is a heat pump? In very simple terms, it's a machine that moves heat from one place to another. So there are billions of heat pumps on the planet. The technology was invented in the 1800s. The first heat pump was actually constructed about 75 years ago. And you use a set of heat exchangers. The heat pumps we're talking about today will be mainly air-sourced heat pumps, capturing heat from the air and then pushing that heat into hot water. You can also have ground-sourced heat pumps and water-sourced heat pumps if you had a pond or a reservoir. But for the focus today, we'll be talking about air-sourced heat pumps. Now, this diagram actually comes from Japan, who's been doing heat pumps for a long period of time and making heat pumps that work in much colder temperatures than in Australia. Now, we just want to differentiate for the people on the call the different types of renewable energy. So many people have heard of solar thermal hot water. So a famous brand in Australia is Solar Hard that was producing these solar thermal hot water systems. And here's an example on the diagram of a solar thermal hot water system. Those have been installed in Australia since the 1950s, and it was based on CSIRO technology. Many people will be familiar with solar photovoltaic or solar PV, which generates electricity on the roof, which is on this particular building here. But the type of renewable energy that we're talking about today is the sun heating up the air temperature and then sucking that air temperature into a device, a heat pump that looks like an air conditioning unit, to then put that into hot water. So that's our main focus today. But keep in mind, heat pumps themselves can be paired with solar photovoltaic, but heat pumps themselves are actually more efficient than solar thermal. So we'll probably see far fewer solar thermal installations in Australia going forward as we switch to heat pumps. Now, a question we often get asked is, does a heat pump work in winter? And heat pumps can work in temperatures as low as -20 degrees Celsius. Now, how can that happen? Well, the heat pumps have refrigerants in them that have boiling points where the boiling point of that refrigerant might be negative 28 degrees. So anytime the air temperature is hotter than negative 28 degrees, you're getting those free oranges that Ian was talking about for heating the water. And the efficiency of different heat pumps is also on a scale, which is measured by coefficient of performance. So to baseline our thinking about coefficient of performance, a typical old traditional electric hot water tank that you might have in a residential house in Australia would have a coefficient of performance of 1.0. And so 1 part of energy gives you 1 unit of heating the water. A heat pump might have a coefficient of performance of 3, 4, 5, or even 6. That means if you had a heat pump that is at a coefficient of performance of 6, you're effectively getting 80% of the energy for heating your water from the air temperature and only relying on electricity for the remaining 20% of energy to heat that water. So heat pumps work, they work better in summer, but they work perfectly well in winter, and they even work in the snowy mountains in Australia. So you have some ski resorts that have heat pumps to heat the hot water in the ski resort. Now, the big reveal for tonight, the one that very few people are aware of, is the New South Wales gas distribution monopoly. Now, most people might have looked at an energy bill and more like a gas bill and seen a company called Gemini and maybe a number to call on their gas bill. Now, very few people are aware that Gemini is a state-sanctioned monopoly for gas distribution in New South Wales. And some other states in Australia, such as Queensland, don't have a state-sanctioned monopoly on their gas distribution network like we do in New South Wales. Now, another thing that people are rarely aware of is that Gemini is a company that's owned 60% by the State Grid of China and 40% by Singapore Power. Now, very few people realize that if you're in a strata building, and even if you've got an individual gas hot water tank, or whether you've got a common hot water plan, you're effectively paying a hot water tax to China and Singapore every time you turn on a tap in the kitchen or have a shower in your bathroom. So one of the things that we're going to show today is, as you switch from a gas hot water plant to an electric heat pump, you can completely avoid paying these hot water taxes to offshore companies. So why put heat pumps into apartment buildings? You use less energy, you can have lower bills, you can avoid a gas distribution monopoly, and you reduce fossil fuel reliance and contribute to reducing carbon emissions. So on this slide, we're just going to talk through a few more stats, but I actually want to give an illustration. First of all, imagine that you want to catch a taxi from North Sydney to the Blue Mountains. You jump in the taxi, you get to the Three Sisters, and the fare for the journey is $262. And then the taxi driver asks you how you're going to pay, and you say, I want to pay with my credit card. And he goes, sure. There'll be a $200 surcharge for using your credit card. Does that sound like a good deal to you in terms of a taxi ride? For me, not so good. However, if you're a studio apartment resident in a strata building, this is something that you do without thinking about it year in, year out. The entire cost of gas for heating your hot water for your studio apartment for the year might be $262. And for the privilege of being connected to the New South Wales gas distribution network, you might pay an additional $200 for that. Now, a couple of other things we've got here, just to give us some ballpark numbers. Imagine there's an apartment building of 40 apartments, and we're running a common hot water plant to create the hot water for those 40 apartments every day. If we used an electric storage hot water system, it might cost us about $60 a day in electricity to create all that hot water for 40 apartments. If we use gas storage, it might cost us $40 a day. If we used an electric heat pump, it might cost us $20 a day. If we used an electric heat pump and we had local solar photovoltaic panels on the roof, it might cost us $15 a day. So how do heat pump running costs compare with other methods? So on this graph, we've got 9 different models for heating common hot water plants in residential strata buildings. And we've split out the fuel cost. The fuel cost could be the gas cost or the electricity cost, and we've split out the billing costs. Now, basically what we want you to do is just look at this diagram and, probably a very common setup for a lot of apartment buildings is common gas storage. And per apartment per annum, you might be paying $393 for heating the hot water for that apartment for the year, and $209 for metering charges, the billing costs of connecting to the gas network. Well, on the far right, wouldn't it be great if we could heat the hot water for an entire apartment for the entire year with a heat pump for $180? Or if we added solar photovoltaic, reduce that to $140 with the combination of a heat pump and solar photovoltaic. So what we're going to do now is just dive a little bit more into detail and have a look at 4 different models for hot water in strata. First of all, if you're in a townhouse or a villa or an older low-rise apartment block, you might actually have your own gas or electric hot water system in your kitchen, in a cabinet, in the laundry, or outside in the courtyard. And it could be possible for you to retrofit your own heat pump system and replace that existing gas or electric hot water service. Now, keep in mind, there's some sound. We'll talk a little bit more about, noise, but typically roughly the same as an air conditioner. Another thing you've got to keep in mind is while heat pumps suck in that warm air, they also expel cool air. So you've got to have an area that's well ventilated where the heat pump has access to that renewable supply of hot air. So if it's in a kitchen cabinet underneath the sink, a heat pump's not for you. But if you've got another setup, you might be able to work this for your individual apartment if you've got your own hot water service. Now, in this second model, we're going to look at centralized gas hot water on a user pays billing model. And basically, here you can see we've got the gas network connected to the gas hot water plant. We've got cold water coming into that gas hot water plant. We've got meters for each apartment going up the building, and these are hot water meters. And Gemina is the company that runs those meters takes the meter reads and on a quarterly basis sends that data over to your selected gas retailer, whether it's an AGL, Energy Australia, Origin, or one of the many other competitive smaller energy companies in Australia. And then those companies actually take that data from the hot water meter that was collected by Gemina, produce your bill, and send that bill and collect the payment from you. So in this model, all the residents do have the freedom to pick from those different energy retailers for their gas or hot water bill, as is the case. Now we're going to move to a centralized heat pump hot water system, which also has user pays billing, but is not relying on hot water meters from the Gemina network. So in this apartment building, you can see cold water coming in from Sydney Water, electricity coming into the hot water plant, the heat pump hot water plant from Ausgrid. You can see a set of meters going up the building for the different apartments, and these are managed by a third-party company. Sometimes this might be referred to as an embedded hot water network. And the BSP, or the billing service provider, it's their job to read those hot water meters and produce a bill and collect the payment from you for this centralized heat pump hot water system with user pays billing. But now we're going to have a look at another model. This is a centralized heat pump hot water model where there are no hot water meters in the building, and instead hot water is a service that's paid through the strata levies. Now, the first thing people are thinking, oh, we've got a mix of owner occupiers and owner investors in this building. Well, the savings you're dealing with from getting rid of all those metering fees and reducing the fuel costs of heating the water with heat pump hot water system are so large that it's actually really easy for an owner investor to create a win-win situation with their tenant by increasing their rent, but not maybe increasing it to the full amount of the savings now that hot water is an inclusion in that tenant's agreement with the landlord. So just have a think. We spoke through some of those metering charges, and if you were to eradicate all that, and we've got a couple of case studies of apartment buildings that have actually gone for this model, and we'll go through that shortly. So in this section, we're going to have a look at some of the barriers to heat pumps and going through the education process with a strata committee or owners, and how to try to increase the awareness and bring owners around to thinking about this new style of hot water heating. So we've just touched there on some split incentives, which is one of the issues that can be covered, the difference between an owner occupier and an owner investor. They're looking for different things from the building, but that we've got this communication issue in strata where actually information doesn't flow very well through all the owners, residents in a particular strata building. Some apartment buildings are trying to use tools such as WhatsApp and other messengers to improve communication, particularly during this COVID period. And in a week where we've got a new mandate that everyone's got to update their strata role because of COVID and really get on top of everyone who's living in the building. But the lack of information around this area is what we're trying to address tonight. And thanks to North Sydney Council's sustainability team for putting this together so that we can help inform people in strata of some other options out there. So some of the metering challenges that you might come up against. So just say, before we jump into this, some data that was collected by the New South Wales government. 12% of apartment buildings in New South Wales, from a data set created by the Neighbours team, have all gas paid for by strata. And 4% of apartment buildings have all domestic hot water provided by strata. That is, the hot water from their gas hot water plant, common hot water plant, is actually already paid through strata levies on unit entitlement basis. And this is not generally known to people. So, for example, in the future, it'd be great if domain.com.au and realestate.com.au actually informed people before they bought an apartment whether hot water was paid through the strata levies or individually metered, because otherwise any comparison people are doing when they're buying an apartment and not taking that into account is actually meaning the comparison of strata levies across buildings is not equivalent on those real estate sites. Now, a couple of challenges when we look at metering. Gemina is not keen for people to decommission gas meters or hot water meters. In fact, you can expect to be charged by Gemina. If you wanted to decommission a common area gas meter, you might pay $1,100. Every individual apartment that's got a Gemina hot water meter, you might pay $150 for decommissioning that. Now, that Gemina monopoly is so entrenched, we've actually got a strata building that switched to a heat pump 4 years ago, and they're still getting gas bills, even though they're not using any gas in the building. They've actually dug up the pipes, the gas pipes, and closed them off, and the Gemina monopoly just keeps going, sending gas bills to these people. They're not paying it, but that's how entrenched the monopoly is in Sydney. Now, if you've got apartments with gas cooktops, gas bayonets for space heating, or you've got a common area barbecue, you're not going to be able to decommission your common area gas meter. But some apartment buildings that don't have those items have been able to get completely off the gas network. And the latest Green Star ratings for sustainable buildings actually don't let buildings get the top star rating, 6 stars, if there's any gas connected to those buildings. Now we're just going to have a little look at noise and heat pumps. So first of all, remember existing gas hot water systems are generating some sound. If you've got 3 Rheem gas hot water boilers with their ventilation fans, you might be looking at 61 decibels at the source of that hot water plant. You can download an app such as the NEOSH sound level meter for free off the App Store. Put this near your existing hot water plant and measure the sound level. If you wanted to estimate the sound of a new heat pump system at its source, you look up the fact sheet, look at the decibel rating, but don't make the mistake of adding the decibels together, because on this decibel scale, 5 48 decibel heat pumps might create only 55 decibels in total. So again, use an online calculator such as noisemeters.com, and then estimate the distance from the proposed heat pump system to the nearest apartment. So a proposed heat pump system with 55 decibels at a distance of 12 meters might be as low as 27 decibels by the time it gets to the apartment. And then look at a chart, and you might find that that might be the equivalent of low-level library noise. And the other thing to remember is heat pumps don't run 24 hours a day. Imagine they might be running 11 out of 24 hours each day. Now, another fear factor that we have to help educate people around is, well, are heat pumps reliable? Okay, a modern heat pump system has multiple redundancy built into the heat pump setup. So what's multiple redundancy? For example, if you had a block of 40 apartments you might actually buy 2 heat pumps, and keep in mind, if one of them developed a fault, the other heat pump would continue working and so you've still got a heat pump working while you're getting the other heat pump repaired. What if both heat pumps failed at the same time? Well, you can actually get storage tanks that have backup electric elements in them. So this is an example of a building, of a solution for a building where if both the heat pumps failed at the same time, you wouldn't be left without hot water because you've still got these backup electric element in the storage tanks. So multiple redundancy can be built in and to make this reliable. And the other thing to keep in mind is typically common gas hot water plants actually need electricity to fire their gas boilers. So during an electricity outage, your gas hot water service is not going to work after it runs out of water. The other thing to consider is heat pumps actually have more storage capacity than gas storage hot water systems. And so if you have an electricity outage, your electric heat pump actually will supply hot water to the building for a longer period of time than a gas hot water plant would. Sometimes people get worried, oh, 3-phase power, single-phase power. Depending on the size of your heat pump system, it's either going to be a single-phase or a 3-phase system, but you can actually look up Ausgrid data for your LGA, and you might be able to look up and see, well, we have 34 outages a year across our LGA, and the average outage is 143 minutes. And keep in mind, you're not affected by all 34 of those outages across your LGA, maybe only half a dozen of them. And the average time of that outage might be 143 minutes. Well, there's no impact if you've got a heat pump hot water system because you've got enough hot water in storage to get you through that average power outage of 143 minutes in your LGA. Now we're going to have a look at some case studies. So we're jumping over to 17 Grasmere Road in Cremorne. So this was a participant in the North Sydney Futureproofing Apartments project. They have 15 apartments across 2 buildings. Now, very unfortunately for this building, usually an apartment block with only 15 apartments doesn't have 2 completely separate hot water plants. In this case, they had 2 hot water plants, one for the front set of buildings, one for the back set of buildings. So actually the cost of them moving to a heat pump was double what it would normally cost for 15 apartments. But what's important here is they bought 2 heat pump systems, and they bought heat pumps that are actually eligible for a federal government rebate known as the small scale technology certificates. And that federal government rebate gave them $4,000 of rebate off their 2 new heat pump systems. So in a building like this, payback about 7.5 years. If they're going to put the solar photovoltaic on, that'll bring the payback down to 6.3 years. For a normal building this size, you wouldn't need 2 heat pump systems, so you could actually halve the payback period. So this was the front building. You could see the original gas boilers, and the rear building, the original gas boilers. And then this is the installation of the 2 heat pumps on the side of the building. And also think from a noise perspective, that's right next to an apartment there. So that's showing you how quiet these heat pump systems can be. In here, you can see taller tanks because they've actually increased the storage capacity of those storage tanks. And this pipe just takes some condensation and puts it down the drain. Now, if we move over to Generation W, it's an apartment complex of 35 apartments in Woolloomooloo. And they installed 6 integrated heat pump and storage units. And this building completely disconnected from the Gemini gas network. They paid $60,000. They're saving about $15,000 per annum, payback in 4 years. So here's what their hot water, gas hot water boiler plant looked like at the back of their garage, in the back corner of their garage before they upgraded. This is what it looks like now. You've got 6, in this case, Quantum Australian-made heat pumps in the hot water room, and this is operated reliably since 2018, since they put it in. For something a bit larger, why don't we move over to Lane Cove? Now, Meriton, not a company that's always known for its environmental credentials, but in this case, Meriton Arise is 5 high-rise blocks on Lane Cove Road. And let's have a look at the electric heat pumps. This entire site is hot water brought to you by electric heat pumps. Now, here you can see, this looks like a Rheem heat pump system. Here's your backup heat pump that can be connected if this one fails. And you can see a lot of storage tanks on the roof of this high rise. If we jump over to one of the other towers in this same complex, you'll see, again, 2 heat pumps. So you've got your redundancy. They're sucking in fresh air from outside the plant room, and multiple storage tanks here. Now, if we go up to Epping, heat pumps and solar photovoltaic panels are an ideal combination. So this building in Epping put 10 quantum heat pumps in 2008. So they've been running heat pumps for common hot water for 13 years now. In 2018, they installed a 34 kilowatt solar system. Now, this particular apartment block is still connected to the Gemini network. They've got some instantaneous gas boosters if there's any failure of the heat pump systems. So they're not getting the savings from getting off the Gemini metering and distribution network that some of the other case studies have had, but they're saving through having solar photovoltaic on the roof. And if we go to the London on the Pacific Highway in North Sydney, this happens to be one of the nicest indoor pools that I've ever seen in a strata building. And it's heated 365 days of the year by this heat pump system that's actually located in the car park area. So I think this went in about 2 years ago. This heat pump would have cost about $12,000, and they'd be getting payback in about 2 years. Now, in this section, we're just going to go quickly through regulation and approvals. There's a lot of detail here. Ian will send out the pack afterwards so you can go through it in more detail. But in February 2021, the New South Wales government amended the Strata Schemes Management Act with a sustainability infrastructure amendment. And what that did was any project such as installing a heat pump or installing a solar system, solar photovoltaic system for your apartment building, had the threshold of votes that you need reduced from a special resolution of 75% down to a brand new sustainability infrastructure resolution of 50% threshold. So this actually makes it easier for strata buildings to implement heat pumps, because you just need, from the people that are present either in person or in proxy at an EGM or an AGM, you just need the more people voting yes based on unit entitlements than voting no based on unit entitlements for a heat pump project to proceed. So the New South Wales government has done a favour to all the strata schemes to make it easier to do projects such as this in February 2021. Now, just to go through the type of people that we typically see as the successful combinations of people on strata committees that get these projects over the line. We call them the bean counter or the accountant, the engineer, and the sustainability champion. Now, the best teams to get these projects through strata usually have at least 2 of these archetypes. If you've got 2 people who are prepared to volunteer their time on a strata committee and drive these heat pump projects, you'll get the best result. Now, when's the best time to upgrade to a hot water heat pump? Don't wait until your gas hot water system fails and starts leaking. By then, it's too late. So you need to find your preferred supplier, get some quotes ready in advance of the existing hot water system blowing and leaking, which happens invariably. Remember, if you've got an EGM or an AGM and you're in a New South Wales strata building that doesn't have electronic voting, you basically need to get your motion. Any owner in the building can put a motion to replace with a heat pump into your strata manager, probably 24 days before the EGM or the AGM. If you're on electronic voting, you'll need to get your motion in 7 days prior to the EGM or AGM. So don't leave it to the last minute, because then your strata building doesn't really have a choice and you'll get stuck in just going for a like-for-like conversion. If you want the horror story, gas leak in East Gardens in Bondi. It's a residential apartment building on top of a shopping centre. 1,000 people evacuated, fire brigade with hazmat suits. Every time the fire brigade comes out to your building, expect to be charged at least $2,000. Now, this building in Bondi Junction made a commitment to get off gas entirely. So they electrified, and this proves that it can be done. Now, we're not going to go into this in detail, but in New South Wales, there's an energy and water ombudsman called EWAN. There's a website where you can find out more about them. If you run into any problems, you can lodge a complaint with EWAN. These are the key complaints that typically EWAN gets from apartment buildings in relation to hot water, etc. Again, this is on their website and you can read it in the pack. There's something called the National Consumer Energy Framework, or NCEF, and this provides consumer protection to people. However, we do need some advocacy in this area to expand the consumer protections to these new models of heat pumps operating in strata without, for example, Gemina metering. So at the moment, EWAN tends to favour resolving disputes around the well-known Gemina, gas hot water systems in apartment buildings, and some advocacy is needed to actually get EWAN to expand their services to cover these new emerging models of hot water in strata buildings. So in red here on this slide, these are the type of suggestions that we would like to see, embraced by the Ombudsman to allow these new, more cost-effective hot water models to move into our strata buildings. So we've got to the end of the formal part of the presentation, and I'll just hand back now to Ian. And Ian, I'm happy to take any questions that people might put in the chat, and we can have about 15 minutes of questions. Sorry, Ian.
Brent, the second last comment there, sustainability infrastructure resolution. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yep. So at the moment, this needs to get out into the strata committee. The way to present this under the new amendment is to actually put two motions into your EGM or AGM. The first motion basically shows that you've ticked 4 criteria, which are fairly simple, to show that you've done your research and that the strata community understands that you've done things like gotten a quote, you've defined who's going to own the hot water plant, whether it's the owner's corporation or a third-party body, and you know, you've defined which lots it applies to, which in most cases will be all the lots in the building. So that's the first motion. Tick off these 4 criteria, and then allow the second motion, which is voting via this sustainability infrastructure motion. And that is just written the same as another motion. Basically, you would have your vendor quote in your back pocket, and you would say, yeah, pursuant to the sustainability infrastructure amendment, we are voting to adopt the quote that was given by vendor X for this many $1,000. We're going to pay for it from the Capital Works Fund, or we're going to pay for it from a strata loan or a special levy. So keep in mind, the Sustainability Infrastructure Amendment also applies to the method of finance. So it lowers the threshold. If you wanted to take out an environmental loan to put one of these in, the threshold will be lowered to 50% for taking out that environmental loan for the heat pump system as well.
Okay, there's a good one that's just come up, Brent. There's a comment from Sue's iPad. I'm about to replace my water heater. My plumber says water heaters are inefficient and noisy. Can a plumber be suggested in the Mossman region?
Okay. Look, we're on a council program, so you know we'd probably not want to actually name a particular plumber, but some good places to go and look are the Australian Energy Foundation. You might be able to find some preferred suppliers on their website. Also, there's a bunch of places you can search for on the internet. You can look at the Sustainable Apartments Facebook group. You can look at Owners Corporation Network member forum, and basically you can just plop a note into there and say, in this area, who's had a good experience with a particular plumber.
There's a Facebook group also called My Efficient Electric Home. There's always a good conversation on that Facebook page about heat pumps and installers too. So yeah, it's a big issue trying to find plumbers who are up to speed with sort of relatively new technology. Can I just say, qualify that statement a bit? Heat pumps have been around for a long time, as we've heard, you know, in fridges and air conditioners, etc. The North Sydney Olympic Pool has had a heat pump heating the water for the last 20 years. And we did an energy audit there back in 2016, 2017, just to look at the costs of heating the pool with electricity, with heat pumps, and with gas, and with cogeneration systems. So there are 4 different heating modes there. And it turned out that heat pumps were the cheapest method of heating the water. And one key point is that the cost of heating the water was half. The cost of heating the water with the heat pump was half the cost of heating the water with gas. So a 50% saving when using heat pumps. Brent, cost of a heat pump?
Look, depends on the size of the building. So we had, if you had an individual townhouse, you might get a heat pump for $3,500. If you're doing a block of 40 units, it might be $45,000. And keep in mind, you need a centralized tempering valve system added in. Do you want that ultraviolet filter as well added in? So it's not just about the hot water. You might actually want cleaner, virus and bacteria free hot water in your complex as well. So you might actually want to improve the amenity of the hot water, the quality of the hot water, as well as just heat it more cheaply.
Okay, and just another comment about the North Sydney Olympic Pool. The new pool will have heat pumps doing the domestic hot water system as well, which is for all of the showers. So there's a heat pump for every application, really, everything from small home, individual homes, all the way up to heavy industry applications. So there's a good question there, Brent, from Susie Nikula. Any tips for how to spec a system for an individual apartment?
With an individual apartment, the key thing that we would recommend is go first to the federal government website that's got the brands of heat pumps which are eligible for the STC rebate. And then once you've looked at that list that are eligible for the rebate, go and to their website and then ask them for their installer in your local area. That's the better way to go about speccing the heat pump, as opposed to calling your existing plumber who probably grew up replacing gas hot water systems with gas or electric with electric, and probably doesn't want to go through the learning curve of learning heat pumps if he or she hasn't done it before.
There's a good question there. How long does a hot water heat pump last in compared to a normal system?
Yep. So one of the benefits, remember, you can do heat pump systems which have separate hot water storage tanks from the compressors for the heat pump. And so if you go out and buy a good brand name, and remember what's bursting at the moment typically in your gas hot water storage setup is the tank is bursting, and then you pay $9,000 every time to replace one tank, but you're also buying a new controller card, the furnace, and so if you've actually got a separate storage tank, you can get a 10-year warranty on those brand new storage tanks. So, and when they burst, they're not taking out the heating equipment, which is typically what's happening in the gas storage systems. So I'd be looking for good brand tanks that come with a 10-year warranty, and then you're getting the longest lifespan out of the heat pump systems. It's the same lifespan for the heat pump compressors as for the reverse cycle air conditioning units, and you might be able to get 15 years out of an air conditioning unit.
What about the heating anode? Brent, is that a common issue?
Sorry, the anode in the...
Yeah, do you think it would be possible to replace the heating anode of an electric heater with the heat pump arrangement, thus keeping the tank in use?
Okay. So what's happening with the gas? A lot of strata buildings don't actually have an ongoing maintenance contract on their anodes in the gas storage systems that they have at the moment. And basically, as they're rusting out, you are getting the brown water coming through the apartments as well. And then the tank gets rusted out, and you lose the tank because it's not on a maintenance plan. So even if you're on a gas hot water service like that, you should put yourself on a maintenance contract if you don't have one today to replace the anodes and extend the lifespan of the tanks.
There's a question here that I may be able to answer partly. Why doesn't the council require all new strata buildings to have heat pumps? Look, that would be a fantastic thing. We'd love to include that, but councils can't mandate those sorts of things at this stage. ASIC is the regulatory body that governs those sorts of legislative priorities. But we would love buildings to install heat pumps as the first option, that's for sure. There's a question there about if the hot water storage tank is in the basement, do you have to put the heat pump outside?
So if it's in the basement car park and it's got some level of ventilation in the car park, then you wouldn't need to put the heat pump outside. One of the case studies we looked at earlier, the one at Generation W, the heat pumps are completely in the basement car park area and it's not ventilated. But what they did, the installer, there was an exhaust flume for the original gas hot water system. And what the installer did at that particular site was put a thermostat next to the heat pumps. And if the heat pumps are blowing out their cold air and it gets too cold in that enclosure, the thermostat detects it and triggers the exhaust fan that actually sucks the cold air back out onto the street so that more warm air from further away in the car park gets sucked into the heat pumps. So that was a clever solution to getting heat pumps into an enclosed area, but you're going to get better performance if the heat pumps are outside with free flowing air over them typically. But also keep in mind, you've got some heat buildup in underground car parks. So sometimes in wintertime, temperature's 5 degrees warmer, 2 meters inside a basement car park behind the garage door than it is outside during wintertime. So you can get good performance and in like a partially ventilated underground car park. And quite a few strata buildings have their pool heat pumps just hanging off the car park wall.
Any other questions?
I've got one there from Max. Can you see that on your chat screen? We have internal small gas hot water heaters on each apartment, and it's inside a little cupboard with an external vent. Is there a feasible heat pump solution for that?
So we haven't seen someone do it yet, replacing instantaneous RIN-Is with heat pumps. Theoretically, if you had a large balcony, the same way that many strata buildings, you get permission and put a split air conditioning system on the balcony outside your apartment, it may be possible to retrofit a heat pump, but we just haven't seen someone go down that path yet, but we would love someone to try it.
It's very difficult because the external wall from the gas heater is a walkway. So right. we can't actually, I mean, maybe it could be very small and up close to the balcony above, but or the walkway above, but need to be fairly compact.
Yeah. If you go look at the slide pack, you can see some compact heat pump units on that 17 Grasmere road building. But yeah, like it's not going to be possible in every situation.
Brent, it's a follow-up question. Ian did answer, this is Balu. Ian did answer that it's possible theoretically to have the reverse cycle air conditioner unit, which I have it in my balcony. possibly used. But yeah, I know you said that you have not seen anyone doing it, but I would like to try it. You know, if it's 7.1 kilowatts.
Yep.
Reverse cycle air conditioner. So I'm assuming it's a reasonably good size, probably that could power the give the heat for the hot water as well.
Yeah, so we haven't seen someone attempt it yet, but keep in mind there's a rumor that Tesla is going to do an HVAC system that's integrated for an entire home. And the rumor is they're going to take the heat pump technology that they developed for the Tesla cars and put that into a home unit that'll do air conditioning and be the heat pump for the hot water as a single unit. So the other thing you could do is watch that space and see if Tesla launches such a product.
Yeah, I've got a funny feeling I've seen something that Steve Eltron do in Europe, which is something that does heating, water and room heating as well. Now I can't remember whether that was like heating the air directly or whether it was hydronic heating. In fact, it might have been hydronic heating elements for the floor and hot water. So there were two functions from that same heat pump. So that's something similar to what you're after, but not exactly the same. It's definitely a fairly advanced engineering question.
Yeah.
And Brent, just one other comment. Ian was the one who mentioned to me about the reverse cycle, and thanks to him, because I was just checking with him when I bought the unit in Laneco. What are the suggestions that he has, and he suggested some of the really good sustainable options. You know, so thanks to Ian again. So
Pleasure.
yeah, and so I look forward to working with the council to see everybody gets into the sustainability as much as possible. You know, so thank you.
Okay.
Well, like that's just about time, I think. Brent and everybody, any final questions? Oh, good, I think.
I just saw one from Kathy. But you might, how long does it take to actually replace the old system? And you would probably have a hot water outage on 1.5 days if it was done correctly on the switchover. I'm sure
they'd make sure there was no break to the hot water service itself. They'd probably install some temporary systems. Is that right?
In a bigger, like we've seen them spec that for high rise, but for a smaller apartment block, you'd probably have you probably would have 1 day and a couple of hours on the next day where you would have a hot water outage because you can't afford to do the extra work to have the temporary system. But for high rise, they spec the temporary system. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's 7 o'clock. I'm sure we've got dinner to get to, etc. So thanks very much, everybody. We'll send a copy of the presentation out tomorrow. And we've also got a printed information sheet as well. We'll send a PDF copy of that for you as well. All of those resources have been produced by Block. Thanks very much for that. Fantastic resources, Brent, and the team.
And thanks, Ian, and the sustainability team at North Sydney for putting this on to try and educate people about these new options.
Yeah, that's great. And anyone who's still hasn't enrolled in the Futureproofing Apartments program who lives in the North Sydney LGA, please go to the Futureproofing Apartments webpage and organise a building assessment for your building, and we can get a report out to you. The report will have business cases for all of the opportunities for sustainability upgrades printed out in a very clear format. We like to make things user-friendly where possible. So thanks again, Brent, and thanks everybody.